I'd just like to begin by paying my respects to the Thathora Matang mob, traditional owners of this land, continuing owners of this land. I'd like to pay my respects to Uncle Russell for that beautiful welcome and the smoking. And something I was really looking forward to when I heard that it was going to happen. There's something about that feeling of the smoke coming over you and the smell that it stains your clothes with when you go, and that cleansing that we start. It's something that's so simple but so profound. I'd also like to thank the organisers of the Do Lectures for having me along today. I really liked that name. I was like, I do lecture. I lecture a lot. So this is probably very, very well suited for me. But I want to talk a little bit today about the distinction between what we do in terms of what we think we do versus the outcomes of what we actually do. And when we're talking about Indigenous Australia, I think we've come a long way forward in what we think we do, but sadly there's still a lot of things that are moving backwards in terms of what we actually do. And so for someone like myself, I'm a trained primary school teacher. I'm the first teacher in my extended family. One of the first generation of people to have gone to uni. And I think back at someone like my dad, who was taken from his family as a very young fellow, was kicked out of school in year 7, never went back. He was droving. At times when I was sitting at home playing computer games and having quite a cosy, enjoyable life, he was out there struggling and struggled for most of his life. Sadly is no longer with us, but things that we're starting to see that we point to say, look at how much further we're progressing, look at all these amazing things that are happening, and I'm very humbled to be able to be a part of a lot of those things. I get to come and I get to speak, I get to talk, I get to be involved in projects trying to improve people's lives, trying to raise people's awareness. But at the same time, I look out at a lot of things that sadly are really moving backwards, and a lot of people don't know are happening and don't like to think about are happening. And there are times, as uncomfortable as it may be, that we really need to stop and say, no, this is what we do. And so Australia is this wonderful multicultural place where we quite often have an acknowledgement of country or a welcome to country, where we're starting to see Aboriginal people at an individual level achieving some amazing, amazing outcomes. We've also seen within the last 10 years the doubling of the number of Aboriginal people in jail. And I'd just like to point out, it's a funny thing whenever we talk about incarceration rates, we tend to think of men. That's with women as well. The rates of Indigenous women incarcerated are amazing. At the moment, we take more kids in multiples from their families than we ever took under the stolen generations. And for much the same reasons. And you hear people say, oh, but we're saving those kids today, whereas before we were stealing them. It's like, that's kind of what they said then too. So, from the perspective of a mother who loses her child, that child was not saved. We put 3 times the amount of money into child removal and out of home care than we do into family support to make sure those children can stay there. We put more money into locking people up than we do into the programs that can ensure they never go down that path in the first place. And so I said, while it is important to celebrate, it's important to stop and to think and to reflect on the history of this country, to acknowledge people like Uncle Russell who come and give their time to welcome us to his land. It's important as well to acknowledge those of us who are not given those opportunities and are not moving forward. And the fact that there are forces at work that are keeping things this way, that are pushing that there. And so while people say, oh, but I didn't do that, I'm not responsible for that, why should I be sorry for what my ancestors did? God, I must hear that at least 10 times a week on average, I would say. What I can say is, if we are a collective, if we are a nation where we are working together, where we are moving together, if an Aboriginal child born today in a remote community in Sydney, in Wagga, in wherever they may be born, are going to be sorry for what our ancestors have done, then I think we can all have a little bit of ownership and a little bit of humanity towards that. And those standards, those frameworks of interpretation. And so, when I talk about my history, be it my family history, my personal history, be it Australian history, the quite common response, I'm sure you've all heard it, get over the past. You've got to get over the past. There is a causal relationship between the past and present. Yesterday leads to today in an ever ongoing cycle of everything that's happened in the past has created where we are right now, and a lot of those issues remain undressed. And that's what I put a lot of my time and my energy into doing. It's funny, I mean, we're at the time of social innovation and entrepreneurs, and I love all the terms that come around. I always am curious to hear when I'm giving a talk what they're going to label. And so, you know, when I was a young fella, I used to get called a young Indigenous leader, which I thought was absolutely phenomenal. But I learned that's something that we sort of label because we like to frame our young Indigenous people as future leaders, more so than acknowledge the leaders that exist today. You know, we have like an Indigenous youth parliament, but we don't have an adult Indigenous parliament. And so we have this focus, and so, you know, I was a young leader until I hit 25, and then I was just some guy. I'm much more comfortable with that for a lot of reasons, to be honest, because that's all any of us are. We all do what we can. But a little bit about me for those who don't know me. My background is in primary teaching. I did a double degree in education and Aboriginal studies, and that was all I ever really wanted to do. I loved being in the classroom. I loved watching those children grow and learn and develop, and, you know, everything from the ABCs to addition and subtraction. But for me, it was more about those human stories. I was only a primary teacher for 3 years, but I can say with some confidence those kids are going to find it very, very difficult to grow up racist in Australia. And growing up in Australia, it's very hard not to be racist. It's very hard not to believe what you're told. And so when I encounter people today who come up with those stock standard responses, I try not to take it at that personal level, because I understand this is what you were told at school, this is probably what your parents tell you, this is what our politicians tell you, this is what our media reflect and enforce every day. And to believe what you're told from birth onwards isn't evil, isn't horrible, it's quite natural. So for me, when I think about my job in teaching in Aboriginal studies, in Indigenous issues more broadly, what I actually do most of the time is try and unteach people the things that they've learnt wrong to get back to the starting point, so then we can start moving forward in terms of what we're actually doing. And so, like I said, I went into primary teaching, absolutely loved the classroom, loved the parents, a lot of the teachers that I worked with, but had some really, really serious issues at a departmental level, at a policy level, about what we enforce. For anyone who's involved in education in New South Wales, we have one of, if not the best written anti-racism policies that you'll ever come across. It talks about direct and indirect racism, rooting out the sources of racism, addressing it at a community level as well as a school level, students, staff, parents, community. It's also one of the least implemented policies. You'll find it in every school with a thick layer of dust on it, and what it translates to at a school level is you have an anti-racism contact officer. So if someone reports an incident of racism, they're given a sort of 2 or 3 day mediation training course, and they fill out the forms and they stamp it off and they pass it away. That does not root out racism, that does not identify racism, that does not actually help us prevent it from happening and understanding what it is. So I had a few challenges within that space, and after a while I wandered off. I taught at universities for a few years, I did research projects for a few years, I did a lot of odd jobs. It was basically that, people say, what do you do? It's like, well, what do you need done and how much money you got? Because I got to eat. That's what I do. I try to pay the rent, and that's what I still do. And in that in-between space of wondering where to go from here, I sort of didn't feel ready to go back into teaching. I felt that I needed to sort of address those issues at a higher level, but didn't know how to get there, didn't know. And a lot of people you'd talk to, they'd be like, just hold on for 10, 20 years and then you'll be in a position to influence. And it's like, that's a long time, and there's a lot that needs to be done, and it needs to be done now. And for my own sense of worth, as well as what I believe is going on, I need to be doing something else. And so in the in-between, like a lot of random people did, and this is where the story takes a very odd tangent, but I started a Twitter account, and just started talking. I was a bit of an insomniac at the time, was a bit frustrated with not moving forward, and so I basically just brain dumped for 18 months on Twitter, every stat, every fact, every perspective, talking about whiteness, talking about race, talking about history, putting up links. Yeah, God, the amount of times I posted a clip to Barbecue Area. For those who haven't seen Barbecue Area, you must see Barbecue Area. Find me later, I'll write it down, it's tricky spelling. But over the course of that, I was really amazed at how many people were interested in hearing from that. I started to get call-outs from principals, from different people working in a whole bunch of different areas to come in and give talks, to start working with people, to start contributing. I felt a sense of worth and of value that was coming through the opportunities I was generating from something as simple as a Twitter account. After a couple of years, I'd had, I don't know, 5,000 or 6,000 followers, a whole bunch of opportunities, and a lot of what I was talking about was combating the negative imagery, the misrepresentation, the misinformation coming through at a media level or at a government level, and talking a lot about how many different voices there are out there. The amount of times you'll get into a debate where someone will go, oh, but an Aboriginal guy told me once. And it's like, that's one person. And the thought that people would then do that with me, oh, but Luke told me, and have that as some dogmatic view on this homogenous idea of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander identity as being the same across the board, I realised that no matter how much I talk about that and point that out to people, I can't actually demonstrate it because I am one person with one view. And so I had the idea to gift the Twitter account that I'd created and the opportunity that had come with that to other Indigenous people who are working on Twitter and trying to tell their stories. We created an account called Indigenous X, and it's a rotating account. It has one different Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander person each week. There's no rules, there's no money, there's no funding. It's just an account. Here's the password, go for it, it's your week, do what you want. Sometimes it goes absolutely amazing, sometimes it causes a lot of trouble and animosity, and sometimes it achieves real world outcomes as well, not just the human dialogue that comes through it. And I've been looking at ways for how I can improve that and how I can grow that, how I can get more reach and more impact and do more through that account. I've been really lucky in the last 12 months. Guardian Australia, when they came to Australia, they reached out. They put a profile of each host each week in The Guardian, so now we're reaching however many thousand readers. A lot of the UK readers are still very confused because they don't realise that it's an Australian paper. Why are you telling us about this every week? So we get some very interesting comments from those guys. But it's a great opportunity. It's raised the profile of the account, and so for the host to know that they're reaching these audiences, that they have this opportunity, it means a lot to a lot of people, and for a lot of the people who follow it as well. There's a crowdfunding group called Start Some Good, who do amazing work with helping people raise funds who are trying to start some good. I love it when something's named like the Do Lectures. They're very simple, they're very meaningful, you don't have to go into a lot of explaining, unlike Indigenous X or the things that I do. I should have thought about that. And so they've given us an opportunity to actually help raise funds for different community projects, artistic projects. We've only started late last year, but we've already raised about $40,000 for a few different projects. Something you might have seen recently was the Elders Report into Indigenous self-harm and youth suicide. And for those who don't know, it really is at truly epidemic proportions. If you look at the Indigenous population as a standalone group within Australia, it's the worst in the world for Indigenous youth suicide, young men and young women. The lack of hopelessness that comes from that, the normalisation of those behaviours. I was talking out there with Unc earlier about that sad truth that it's, whenever you've got a group of Indigenous people together, odds are most of us have buried several people in that fashion, family members, friends, uncles, aunties, cousins. And it's devastating, and it becomes normal. And it becomes normal to expect that no one's going to care and that no one's going to do anything about it. And so to see this report at the moment actually getting noticed and getting acknowledged, a group that the banner that it's under Uncle Max Harrison, it's called Culture is Life. And again, a remarkable name for a very, very simple concept. I mean, at the moment, the government, when they came in, it's like really simple. We want parents to go to work, we want kids to go to school. That's all we need to do. There's no acknowledgement of culture, of the importance of healing, of the importance of language, of history, of having things on our own terms in our own way. And so having these elders get up and acknowledge, who are actually working with this stuff on the ground, who have experienced it personally, saying we need to get back to culture and to actually have that listened to, and for Indigenous X to have played a small part in that, in raising funds to help them print and distribute, and helping with the social media campaign around that, is for me something remarkably humbling and remarkably profound, and has given my life a deeper meaning, a deeper sense of connection to the Australian identity. It's broken down a lot of barriers with how I look at everyone, at everything, everywhere that I go. And when I think about what I want the account to achieve, I want other Indigenous people specifically to be able to experience that, to be able to tap into that, to be able to be a part of it. But I want our non-Indigenous audience and followers and friends and family members to be able to come along with that journey as well, and to break down a lot of that feeling of hopelessness, that feeling that the government can do that, or someone else can do that, or Aboriginal people need to do that themselves, or this is not my problem, I'm not responsible for the past, I'm not responsible for the present, I'm not responsible for the future. I want us to go, and it's not about whose job it is to do, it's about there's a job that needs to be done, and we can do it. And a lot of the time, all that needs to be done is showing that compassion, is having that understanding, is educating ourselves, educating each other, sharing our stories, letting down our barriers, and meeting face to face and being human, showing basic respect to each other. The amount of times I get, and big thanks to Andrew Bolt if you're watching this one for this, but the amount of time when people hear that I'm Aboriginal, they'll just go, no, you're not, or an assumption that I'm only doing it for all the amazing free things that they wrongly think we get for being Aboriginal. We have such loaded assumptions. The narrative is already set really hard in concrete, and so it's really hard to get out of that, and that comes back to that unlearning process. And so the best thing I can do, if you're interested in learning, is to actually think about what you already believe you know, recognising that it's probably not that accurate, and going back to the start and thinking about, well, what can I do? Where can I learn it? How can I engage? Something like Twitter, through Indigenous X, through the other mob out there, it's a great place to start, but you need to be out in places like this with people like Uncle Russell. You need to be on country, you need to spend time, you need to experience, you need to sit down face to face. Like the amount of people I know on Twitter who go, I've never met an Aboriginal person, or I know one Aboriginal person. If you've been following Indigenous X since you've started, you've had a week-long experience with 100 different people, one week after the other. And the fact that, that's not many people, but the fact that I dare say, for the vast majority of people in this room, that's more people than Aboriginal people than you've ever met, is pretty sad when you think about it. And it's something that we can do something to change, we can impact on that. And so there's a wonderful old quote that I'd like to share. This is a story from old missionary rocking up to the mission, and he's, I'm here to help. And old Arnie sits there and says, bud, if you're here to help me, you are wasting your time. But if you are here because you know that your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together. And that's what we need to do. That's what I want people to think about. I know we've got a lot of entrepreneurs in the room, a lot of people working in different spaces, and I want to help. Indigenous people, Indigenous issues, we aren't a charity. We aren't a cause. We aren't an opportunity to pat yourself on the back about feeling good. And it's not a one-way street. What Aboriginal cultures, what Torres Strait Islander cultures, what individual people have to share and to give back is so rewarding, is so humbling. And to see people who've been through such amazing and often horrific stories are still willing to share, it brings me to my knees every time when I sit there and I experience it. It keeps me grounded, it keeps me humble. And so I would like to invite everyone for what I do to come and to follow us and to join in and to work with us and to recognise we need each other within this space, but we need to respect our place within each other's spaces. When I'm in your house, I acknowledge that. When you're in mine, I expect the same acknowledgement. We can have partnerships, but we need to break out this idea of charity. We need to move away from that. This is justice. We are talking about justice that is denied, justice that is being crying out for, people to work with that and contribute to that. and it is something that can be achieved. This is not the intangible, wicked problem that has no solution. We can do this, but we can only do it if we work together. And I'd like to thank you all for listening and look forward to talking.